If you were following the news about the production of Marvel's Thunderbolts, you may remember that 2 roles were recast. Val's assistant, Mel, who is played by Miracle Workers' Geraldine Viswanathan, was originally going to be played by The Bear's Ayo Edebiri. And then Bob, who was very charmingly portrayed by Top Gun Maverick's Lewis Pullman, was originally going to be played by Steven Yeun. And that made sense. Yeun had a relationship with director Jake Schreier, who produced and directed Netflix's Beef, which would go on to earn Steven all kinds of awards. So yeah, of course Steven works with Jake on his next project and lands what we did not know at the time turned out to be the very juicy role of Bob, who, light spoilers for Thunderbolts, would eventually become one of Marvel's top 5 Superman pastiches, the Sentry. But in January of 2024, before the movie even had an asterisk, Steven needed to back out of Thunderbolts. In an interview, Steven would say, "I think for me, time passing and things shifting kind of pulled me out of it," alluding to the delays caused by the dual writers and actors strikes. But Steven was very clear, he still wanted to do one of these. Quote, "I want to do a Marvel movie. It took a lot of drafts on email to make sure that I conveyed the sincerity of how sorry I was to have to back out." And when asked what role he would eventually like to play, Steven said, "I have some ideas, but I heard that if you put it out there, you'll never get it. So I'll keep it close to my chest." Fair enough. But I, as a big fan of Steven's and the YouTuber who secretly writes all the Marvel movies, have given this a lot of thought recently, and I wanted to share my thoughts in a video. These are characters not yet introduced in the MCU who I think Steven could be perfect for, except one who we'll get to. It's complicated. But let's say I'm putting this into the universe on behalf of Steven, in the hopes that one of these roles manages to work out. And to get everyone ready for that, I want to answer one very important question. What makes a Steven Yeun type character? I would say in the last few years, the word I tend to associate most with a Steven Yeun character is dirtbag. And very clear here, this is not because I think Steven Yeun, the person, is a dirtbag. Sure, he has that little mustache, but besides that, he seems very down-to-earth and decent. But his characters recently are skewing heavily towards dirtbag. What is a dirtbag? Well, apparently it's the kind of guy who is dirty, which I wouldn't say is really a Steven Yeun character trait, but to me, a dirtbag is someone who is weaselly, shifty. You can't trust them, and they lie to themselves about this. They constantly say they're a good guy because they can't face the truth that they're just not. For me, this is Jupe, my favorite Steven Yeun role from one of my favorite movies of all time, Nope. He's friendly, welcoming, wants everybody to have fun, but at the same time, you don't trust him because you know if things get tough, he'll cut you loose. He'll feed your horses to the Sky Shark and lie about it to your face. Or Steven's character Timo from Mickey 17. He's a total dirtbag. Pretends he's helping Mickey but gets him in way over his head and abandons him to become a pilot. And Timo is happy to let Mickey die constantly. He even leaves Mickey to die on his own because he doesn't want to go through the trouble of killing him, which in this case would be the decent thing to do. But if that were it, if a Steven Yeun character was just a dirtbag, who would care? Why would he make such an impact? Well, because he's got a ton of good qualities to balance out the dirtbaggery. Like, Steven Yeun characters tend to have a boyish charm to them. Take Glenn. He's the youngest adult member of the original Walking Dead gang and sort of becomes the romantic lead of the series. He's bright, optimistic, and sincere, representing a future without the cynicism that burdens so many of the other main characters. Or Mark Grayson on it. He's young, and around characters like his father, or Cecil, that originally gets framed as naive, but in reality, Mark's idealism becomes his greatest strength, able to both keep him going and inspire others. And Steven's idealistic characters can even become revolutionaries. In Sorry to Bother You, Squeeze becomes the union leader. In Okja, Kay is a hardcore animal rights activist. These characters are often parts of complicated critiques of society, so they cannot just be one-dimensional. They need an edge that comes from a deep frustration. Steven Yeun characters also tend to have a tragic backstory. Obviously, we see Mark's play out during the first season of it. And we watch Jupe's in Nope's opening minutes, as well as during his detached description of the SNL sketch that frames how he understands his trauma. And Steven Yeun characters are determined. They're hustlers. On Beef, Steven's character Danny is constantly trying to figure out how to make money and lecturing his cousin on work ethics. And in Minari, Steven plays a father who is determined to pursue the American dream at the cost of his relationship with his family. Whether it's building a farm or selling macaroons, Steven Yeun characters have big dreams that get them into trouble. And finally, Steven Yeun characters tend to have a chip on their shoulder. They have something to prove to the world or their family or themselves. Mark is constantly being compared to his father, and he needs to convince everyone that he's not the same kind of guy. Danny believes that the world has it out to get him, and he needs to succeed to prove his worth. And Jupe needs to prove that he can tame a monster and control the natural brutality that destroyed his life as a child. Steven Yeun characters are human. We all know a guy like Danny, someone determined, but defined by a flaw that will always stand in the way of their success, and frequently are driven to dirtbagness. So that's what we're working with. In this video, I'm going to cover 4 characters. I'll give you some background on the character, talk about how I think they could fit into the current MCU, and make the case for what Steven could bring to that role. And just for fun and engagement, let's be honest, write down in a comment the character you think Steven would be right for before you've seen any of my suggestions. And then once you've watched the video, let me know if I convinced you one way or the other. Also subscribe. Okay, so to narrow down the hundreds of potential characters Steven could be, I started by asking a question. Steven Yeun is Korean. Are there any high-profile Korean Marvel characters? And that got me my first pick. Marvel has a surprisingly deep bench of Korean and Korean American characters, many of which sprung up in the last decade. Now, many of the high-profile Korean characters are women. There's Silk, Luna Snow, White Fox, and then for guys, there's Amadeus Cho, but he's usually on the younger side. In fact, there were rumors that Logan Kim, Ghostbusters Afterlife's podcast himself, was going to cameo as Cho in Brave New World, but either way, our Cho can't be older than like 20. But there are still a few other guys in something called Tiger Division. It was first introduced in 2022 as Korea's premier super team. And if you're thinking, wait, isn't there already one of those? That's Agents of Atlas, but they're the super team composed of heroes from all over Asia. Tiger Division is just South Korea, and one member of Tiger, Luna Snow, is also part of Atlas. Anyway, there are 4 men on this team. First, you've got a magic rock totem guy named the General. This would not really be a good fit for Steven. This is more of the team's Groot. He's the big softy. Then there's Gunnar 2. He's an android, but a sarcastic android. So that is definitely within Steven's range. The only downside is he doesn't have a human face. This would be a full voice role. And while Steven is no stranger to voice acting, I think we can do better. There's also Mr. Enigma. He's some sort of indestructible demigod who drinks a lot and doesn't take any of this seriously. I don't think this is Steven's sort of character. He feels like a character who, in a world where Eternals did not exist, would be played by Don Lee. Not exactly a Steven Yeun type. But then there's the face of Tiger Division, a hero named Taegukji. This is South Korea's Superman. And like one of the stronger characters in Marvel Comics, he's frequently compared to Hyperion and Sentry. So wouldn't it be fun if we gave Steven another Sentry character to play? Of course, the fun of Steven as Sentry is that he would mostly have been Bob, the, I'm gonna guess, lovable dirtbag who has no idea he's essentially a god. So we wouldn't really get that here. Except in the Tiger Division series written by Emily Kim with art by Kreese Lee, Ken Nitro, and VC's Ariana Mar, we explore Taegukji's past, and you would never believe it, he was kind of a dirtbag. Turns out, as a kid, long before he got his Superman powers, Taewon started a street gang with his friend Min Jae, who is more of a dirtbag and would also work as a Steven Yeun role. But Taewon formed a gang, and eventually they tried to steal a machine from a military base, but as they were stealing it, it went off and it gave Taewon superpowers. So he became a superhero named Taegukji after the flag of South Korea and formed Tiger Division largely because of the guilt he felt for causing so much trouble as part of this gang. But Taegukji did not tell anybody this. And when one of his old friends turned out to not be dead, Taegukji needed to try desperately to hide this part of his past from his new team. That sounds like a Steven Yeun character. Now realistically, I don't think Tiger Division is a high priority now, even though Luna Snow is having a moment in Marvel Rivals, and Tiger Division has a new comic as part of Marvel's One World Under Doom event. But I would be surprised if we get a Tiger Division anything in the next few years. And for that reason, Taegukji is not at the top of my list, but I think it could be fun. But is there a character that seems to be at the top of everyone's list, who will probably show up soon, who Steven would work as? Sort of. Let's talk about Mr. Negative. So let's get this straight. Martin Lee, aka Mr. Negative, is Chinese. I know that. But hey, Hollywood loves to play fast and loose with Asian roles, even comic book characters. This is the Japanese Psylocke. This is the Japanese Colleen Wing. I'm not saying it's good, I'm just saying it happens. And more importantly, B, this specific role comes up a lot for Steven. In fan casting, but recently also in rumors. So it seems plausible. Who is Mr. Negative, you're asking? Well, he's not this guy. This is Negative Man. Similar color scheme, different guy. Also, he's DC. Mr. Negative is a Spider-Man villain who was introduced as part of the Brand New Day storyline. Hold on to that one. The man we know as Martin Lee was actually a gang member who trafficked people into the US, and after an accident, he quit the gang and assumed the name of one of the dead passengers, Martin Lee. He was then captured by the Magia gang and experimented on using the same drug as the one that would give Cloak and Dagger their powers. And he got Mr. Negative powers, which are a bunch of stuff. He can use the light and dark force to make himself strong and durable, but more importantly, the light force can heal people and the dark force corrupts them, turns them into evil versions of themselves. The fun thing about Martin Lee is, when he is not Mr. Negativing, he's running the Feast homeless shelter where Aunt May worked in No Way Home. Martin Lee is a kind, generous man who is always looking out for the least fortunate members of the community. But when he is overtaken by the Mr. Negative personality, oh yeah, this is one of those, he becomes a crime lord intent on taking over the New York criminal underworld, especially the part that experimented on him. So would Steven be a good Mr. Negative? I mean, listen, let's pretend Mr. Negative is Korean. I think Steven could sorta do this. My main issue is he's not enough one way or the other. Martin Lee is incredibly nice, and Mr. Negative is completely evil, but neither of those are what I would consider Steven's strong suits. My favorite Steven Yeun characters operate in that gray area, so I'm not convinced he's the best fit for this role. And there are plenty of Chinese actors that could do it. Off the top of my head, two from a show I watched recently, Interior Chinatown. You got Chris Pang and Archie Kao. And of the two, I kind of prefer Kao, and not just because he was a Power Ranger. But I think either of those two, or the hundreds of thousands of other Chinese actors, could also play this role. Now, I'm not saying I don't think this will happen. I could totally see a world where Marvel jumps at the opportunity to take this incredibly popular actor and cast him in something as soon as possible. And hey, Brand New Day, the story that Mr. Negative was introduced in, just happens to be the namesake of the new Spider-Man movie. I just don't think this is Steven's best fit. But when he inevitably gets this role, I don't want to see a bunch of aged like milk comments. If anything, this aged like water. It's fine. But okay, so my first suggestion is Taguchi. And I guess Mr. Negative is my second suggestion with a big asterisk of that I don't think it's a great idea, but it's probably what will happen. But speaking of Sentry-esque characters who can rewrite reality and are not quite all there, let's talk about my third pick, and one I kinda love, Owen Reese, aka the Molecule Man. Owen Reese is one of the more powerful characters in the Marvel Comics universe, and I know I end up saying that all the time in these. I think I already even said it about Taguchi, but Owen is a different kind of powerful. Taguchi can pick up a building. Molecule Man can turn the building into cotton candy and then eat it. Owen started out as a frustrated lab technician at a nuclear power plant. He believed they didn't pay him enough and scheduled him for shifts that were unreasonably long, and one day, yada yada yada, you know the drill, bombarded with experimental radiation that turned out to be linked to the Beyonders, the race of aliens that is frequently ranked at number 2 just behind the one above all as the most powerful beings in Marvel. I did it again. But that power was now coursing through Owen's veins. So Owen, going by the name Molecule Man since he was able to control molecules, so like everything, started doing crimes and eventually got the attention of the Fantastic Four, who would become his main antagonists. Most people know Owen from his roles in both Secret Wars events. He's one of the villains recruited by the Beyonder in Secret Wars 1 and ends up working for Doom and falling for one of Doom's newly minted henchwomen, Volcana. And then in 2015 Secret Wars, we learn that Molecule Men are bombs used by the Beyonders to destroy universes, and Doom manages to turn Owen into an engine that lets Doom reshape reality in his image. Owen stops doing that when offered a hamburger. But that's what's fun about the Molecule Man, is that he has phenomenal cosmic power, but is constrained by his own insecurities. Even early in his career, he basically created a mental barrier that gave him fewer powers, and convinced himself that he needed a wand to do anything. Owen thinks the world is out to get him, even though he can literally do whatever he wants to the world. And that sort of feels like a Steven Yeun character, a normal guy with incredible abilities and an enormous chip on his shoulder, keeping him from doing anything interesting with those abilities. It reminds me how Danny from Beef gets all the opportunities to succeed, but cannot let his titular beef with Amy go, and he is ultimately destroyed by it. And I could see a world where Molecule Man plays a role in the future of the MCU. Like I said, he was a Fantastic Four villain, and they're about to take the spotlight in Doomsday, and the MCU loves a deranged reality warper. Arguably, its two best series are built around someone with unresolved trauma turning the world into their personal playground, just like Molecule Man tends to do. So Molecule Man could be a fun role for Steven, but if we're talking about scheming hustle grind set types who can't keep themselves out of trouble, which is something I think Steven plays particularly well, and if we were talking about characters who I would personally love to see in the MCU, 2 were at the top of my list. The first is a character I've talked about at length in a previous video, one I even already fan-casted with a very different sort of actor. He is the leader of the Great Lakes Avengers, Mr. Immortal. So 2 obvious issues. Number 1, the MCU already has a Mr. Immortal. He showed up in the 6th episode of the first season of She-Hulk, titled Just Jen, who was played by Veep's David Pasquesi, and in case there was any confusion, he explains his power set, uses his superhero name and his secret identity, and most importantly, demonstrates those powers. So he is the Craig Hollis, and he is very much immortal. And then number 2, maybe you're thinking, well, doesn't he have a son? Someone mentions a Craig Jr., maybe Steven could be playing that character. He could, but the person who says that line and Craig are white. So it would be tough to explain how they have a Korean son. And you may say, well, maybe he's adopted. Yeah, but then how did he inherit his dad's superpowers? It just doesn't work. Now, there are ways around this. First off, while Craig is traditionally a mutant in the comics, that's not made explicit in the show. So he could have gotten his abilities some other way. Exposure to a chemical, cosmic rays, magic. You never know. So Craig and his adopted son, played by Steven, could both have powers because of exposure to a radioactive mineral or even a blood transfusion. Makes a She-Hulk callback. Or maybe this is just a different guy with a similar name and the same powers. Greg Wallace or something like that. No relation to Craig, but like everyone that cares in the audience knows what we're doing here, and that would play into his issues being taken seriously. He becomes Mr. Immortal even though there's already a guy called that, and it works. So this Mr. Immortal tries the same thing with his team. But okay, so if you have not seen my Marvel Needs to Make a Great Lakes Avengers show video, here's the gist of the team. It's a bunch of F-list heroes with largely, although not exclusively, mutant powers that border on being useful. Mr. Immortal created the team in the image of another official Avengers offshoot, the West Coast Avengers, but Craig made the Great Lakes Avengers without the consent of the actual Avengers, so they spend most of their energy dodging lawsuits and figuring out what it is they do here. Like I said, Craig is the leader of the GLA. He has the power of literal immortality. The Marvel Grim Reaper, not the character, like the spirit, also known as the Death Urge, came to him and told him that he would be the last living thing in all of existence. But besides that, Craig does not have any of the powers that would make him an asset to the Avengers, so he started his own Avengers. Craig is a character with ambition. He believes the world owes him a spot in the big leagues. Craig did not need to make this team an Avengers. They could have just been the Great Lake Protectors or something. But Craig believes he deserves a better title than that, and he understands the value of a brand. Craig is also a survivor, and that has shaped his worldview. As a child, Craig was tricked by the Grim Reaper into killing his father. Then he went to a foster family and fell for his foster sister, only for her to also die tragically. Craig can easily become detached from reality and the consequences that everyone but he is subject to. This manifests in Craig sending the team on incredibly dangerous missions without recognizing the potential risk. He's not a great boss. And who does that sound like to me? Jupe. Survived a close encounter with death as a child and became detached from reality. Got everyone killed because he couldn't comprehend the danger posed by Jean Jacket. And like Mr. Immortal, he's focused on branding, used his tragedy to fund an amusement park, and discovered a monster, but instead of killing or capturing it, he turned it into part of the show. And speaking of being a survivor, Steven is also known for playing Glenn, a survivor of the zombie apocalypse, for a while anyway, and of course the ultimate superhero survivor. Steven Yeun's characters love to grapple with their unkillability, real or imagined. And like Danny and Beef, Craig is an entrepreneur. He starts a team, holds tryouts, gets attention. He's not a good leader, but Craig is certainly a leader. So I think Steven has the perfect energy for Mr. Immortal. But there is one character who happens to be closer to my heart that I think Steven would be perfect for. Right now, the team with the most casting opportunities in the MCU is obviously the X-Men. And yet, there are not many X-Men that I think Steven would be right for. And that doesn't even come from the fact that, to my knowledge, we have not had a Korean X-Man. And while there are a handful of Asian X-Men, they're almost all women. The only man in the group that I can think of is Sunfire, and that character has way too many connections to Japanese history, and specifically the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, to be played by a non-Japanese actor. I just don't see it. But you know me, I've got no problem with non-white actors playing what would normally be white characters, especially since on the X-Men, there's a ton of those. those, but which X-Men is tricky. I don't think Stephen works as a member of the First Class. I don't see him as any of the giant-sized X-Men, or the New Mutants, or Generation X, or Academy X, or X-Force, or Excalibur, or X-Statix, although actually he'd maybe be an okay Mr. Sensitive, but that's not my pick, because I skipped one team there. My personal favorite X team, X Factor, and their second incarnation, X Factor Investigations, was led by the Marvel character that I think has the most Steven Yeun-iness, Jamie Madrox, aka Multiple Man. You may know Multiple Man as the guy who joins the Brotherhood of Mutants in X3 with the classic line,
"I'm in,"
pledging his life to the mutant resistance with the same amount of gravitas you would give someone asking if you want to play another round of Fortnite. But believe it or not, in the comics, he's more interesting than that. Also, not to nitpick, not unlike my podcast, Mostly Nitpicking, he's introduced in X3 like this.
This one robbed 7 banks at the same time.
What is the value of that, Jamie? Why rob the banks at the same time? You figure the way Multiple Man robbing a bank is impressive is that he can do the entire Dark Knight intro by himself. He doesn't need guys. And you may be thinking maybe there's some value in overwhelming the system. If the 7 banks were right next to each other, then the police would have a hard time responding to all of the robberies. But also, then those are bad robberies. A good robbery is one where nobody calls the cops until you leave. And at that point, who cares? The dupes don't need to make getaways. Original Jamie just absorbs them all, right? Also, not to nitpick again, Magneto, not unlike my podcast, Mostly Nitpicking, why is Jamie used as a distraction? Magneto's plan is to trick the government into thinking they found him in the forest, but then it turns out they've only found a bunch of Multiple Men. And then Magneto and the real Brotherhood, I guess, walk to the Golden Gate Bridge and storm Alcatraz. But like, what's the value there? When they get to Alcatraz, the guards are already ready for them. It's not like this plan seems to benefit from catching them by surprise. And you waste mutants by sending them in as a wave of pawns so the military uses their mutant guns and Arclight can destroy them, but like, why not, instead of sacrificing half of your mutant guys, you just bring Jamie? He Multiple Mans, overwhelms the guards, forces them to use their anti-mutant weapons, and then you destroy the guns. Worst case scenario, they hit the real Multiple Man and he gets depowered, but as long as you protect him, you're really not in any danger. And since you know the military is coming to the forest and you set the Jamie trap, why not ambush them with all the actual mutants? You have the element of surprise, and you know who else can trick cameras with fake heat signatures? This guy. The guy who can also burn all the soldiers alive. Leave Pyro and some of the other mutants with offensive powers behind to deal with these guys. But then they won't be able to get to Alcatraz later, right? No, you have Vanisher, a teleporter who is apparently part of the Pawn Wave, who you sacrifice, even though, as we've demonstrated in these movies, a teleporter can basically kill everyone if he wants to. Leave Vanisher back in the forest and he can bring those mutants to Alcatraz as backup. Jesus Christ, Magneto. No wonder you keep getting all of your guys killed. Sorry, I've been thinking about this for like 20 years. Also, not to nitpick, not unlike my podcast, Mostly Nitpicking, this line,
"In chess, the pawns go first."
In X2, this line would just be, the pawns go first. But X3 specifically has next to no subtlety, so they add the in chess. This movie is rough. But okay, so who is Multiple Man? Well, Jamie Madrox is a complicated guy, and that's part of why I like Steven so much for this role. Jamie is conflicted internally, but then, as a result of his mutant ability, it becomes external. Let me explain. Jamie can create duplicates, or dupes as he calls them, of himself. They're essentially just real versions of Jamie until the main Jamie decides to absorb them back into his body. And when Jamie absorbs a dupe, he gets their memories, which means if Jamie wanted to, he could say, send a dupe to ride a roller coaster, and then reabsorb the dupe and have the memories of the ride become part of Jamie's memories, as if he was the one that rode the coaster. In practice, what Jamie did at one point was send a flock of dupes in every direction and tasked each one with learning a different skill. One became a lawyer, one became a physicist, one became a priest, and then Jamie reabsorbed all but a few of the dupes and became a guy with a lot of skills and knowledge. So 2 problems here. 1, his mind was sort of a mess. And 2, if you have all of these skills, what should you do with your life? Luckily, Jamie loves one thing above all else: noir. Detectives, dames, mysteries, murder. Jamie is all about that whole thing. And when he needed to decide what to actually do with himself, Jamie used the money one of his dupes won on a game show and became a private eye under the outfit X Factor Investigations. Now, I'm skipping a lot of his history here. He's one of those characters that was introduced as a bad guy, but that didn't last. He was also part of the government-sponsored team X Factor, but Investigations is when Jamie really shined. And because of his myriad skills, mixed with his identity crisis, he got to be both a competent detective and an incompetent everything else. Sure, Jamie knows how to interview a witness, but he's really bad at managing a team, especially one that includes a former girlfriend. Because Jamie wants to be everything to everyone. And because he has absorbed all of the skills and knowledge, he should be able to. But as a result, he is fractured, constantly compromising, and lamenting his own weakness. And worst of all, for the investigations run, his powers are on the fritz, and whenever he creates a dupe, it takes on one of Jamie's traits. The dupe could be the compassionate version of Jamie, or the self-conscious version of Jamie, or the horny version of Jamie. But Jamie is forced to reckon with the fact that these are all pieces of himself. Unlike Cyclops, or Storm, or the usual X-leaders, Jamie is an enormous mess. He is the Hawkeye of the X-Men. So why Steven? Because Steven Yeun characters wear their insecurities on their sleeves. They try to hide it, but they can't. Jupe is still a scared little kid. Jacob is terrified of failing his family. Mark is worried he'll turn into his father. Danny is really, really angry. Unlike a lot of other leading men, Steven Yeun characters have an almost impossible time keeping their cool. Maybe it comes from his background in improv, but a Steven Yeun character is almost always at the same time losing and moving forward. Multiple Man takes hits and gets back up, but unlike other characters who can do this all day, Jamie is not a role model. He's just a guy, a normal messed up guy who is trying to do good in spite of himself. So Kevin Feige, the person this video is for, those are my suggestions. Taguchi, Molecule Man, Mr. Immortal, and Multiple Man. And if we really have to, and I don't think we should, I guess Mr. Negative. But we should pick one of those other four, because they're really good. And you know what else is good? Nebula. I would be surprised if you have not heard of Nebula by now. It is a subscription streaming service that I and a bunch of YouTubers created back years ago, not that long ago, but like it's been around for a little while. The goal was we wanted an ecosystem where we could exist outside of the algorithm, so we wouldn't have to cater to views and stuff like that. We'd make the videos that we wanted to make. And at the same time, we wanted to have space to make original projects with bigger budgets. And we have some really cool ones coming out. Obviously, there's stuff like Jetlag, which is hugely popular, and I don't need to explain probably what jet lag is to you. There's also Abolish Everything, which I really enjoy. Patrick Willems has a short film coming out soon called The Dinner Plan. Maggie Mayfish has a series coming out soon called Amy's Dead End Dream House, which from what I have seen, seems like a take on like a Pee-wee's Playhouse, one of those shows where like the furniture talks to you, but with a more contemporary twist. And I think Maggie and her team are really smart and funny. I cannot wait to see this show. And then one of the biggest things we have coming up is a show we're working on called Subliminal. It's an anthology. It's very dramatic in the vein of things like The Twilight Zone, but instead of being based around some funky science fiction concept or whatever, this is all just based on complicated human relationships. A bunch of cool YouTubers are writing and directing episodes of this. We have actual actors doing this work. This is going to be really exciting. And one of the episodes, one that is going to be directed by Patrick Willems, is written by me. The episode is called Power Trip. I, again, don't want to spoil it because just when it comes out, you watch it and you'll love it. This is really my first like Nebula original thing, so I'm very excited about it. I've been writing it for a little while. If you're like, why is some of the video frequency slowed down a little bit? But I'm done with it, so that's the best part. You know, I've written it. So there it is. It's there. So it is up to Patrick and our production team to put this episode together. I think it is going to be really cool. And you're going to be able to watch that exclusively on Nebula. And you see all my videos early and ad-free, and that is Nando V Movies videos and the Nando Cut videos. The Nando V Movies videos are usually like at least 2 weeks early, maybe like a month early. So that is a really good way to stay as close to up to date as you possibly can with all of my thoughts about stuff. The Nando Cut videos, because of the quick turnaround, those usually end up on YouTube, you know, a couple hours after they're on Nebula, but still they're on Nebula first. And a yearly subscription to Nebula is a steal already at $5 a month or $60 a year. But if you go to go.nebula.tv/NandoVMovies, you can get a year of Nebula for just $3 a month. It is the best deal we've got. It's a great way to see all my videos. There's a bunch of other creators on Nebula who you definitely already like. And there's a bunch of others that we're bringing on as, you know, time goes on. Who knows when you're watching this video? Check out Nebula. There will be people that are not on there when I'm recording it. And we have some pretty cool ones that I'm excited are going to be part of Nebula. And we're always growing. So anyway, that is my pitch for Nebula. So watch my videos early and ad-free and watch Subliminal, specifically my episode and all the other episodes, when they are released. In the future. I do not know exactly when, but we're working on it right now, and I'm sure we will have more updates. So follow me on, you know, Twitter and all that stuff. I'm Nando V Movies all over the internet, and you will see updates from me.